Oh, hello, and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where it was on this day in 2023, although it feels like yesterday, that we lost Jeff Beck. And it was, at least for most of us fans, it was really like a bolt out of the blue. It was something totally unforeseen by us and unexpected. But Jeff Beck's loss it's sad, but it's also interesting because his shoes can never be filled. Jeff Beck was one of those unique guitarists, and there's only a few that I would put on this list where no matter what guitar he was playing, no matter what effects he was using, no matter what amp he was using, you knew from just one note that it was Jeff Beck. You could say the same about Eddie Van Halen. There's other great ones that you could say. I think Hendrix in his own time, certainly. And he just had that sound. The way that he played the guitar, it was the Jeff Beck style of guitar playing. And it was as original as it was virtuosic, as it was listenable. And I think when you combine all three of those attributes, that's one of the reasons why Jeff Beck is someone who is loved by people from very different approaches to not only music playing, but music listening. Think about the players. He's loved by fellow guitarist John McLaughlin. He's loved by people like Gary Husband from the English fusion scene. He's loved by people like Stevie Wonder. He's loved by people like Richie Blackmore, who does not really like anything remotely jazzy. He's loved by no one dislikes Jeff Beck's playing, and I think just about everyone loves Jeff Beck. If I were to do a movie about him, I would call it Everyone Loves Jeff Beck because it's true. And I think that one of the reasons for that is he played so many different styles of music without really pandering to sort of the cliches or pretenses of any one style. Whatever he ended up doing, it was just Jeff Beck. Whether it was taking the Yardbirds in some interesting new directions, he was Jeff. Then his first band with the albums Truth and Beckola, it was Jeff being Jeff. And Truth is a really interesting album because, on the one hand, it's sort of a very dated, even though it was late 60s, almost a feeling of mid 60s proto heavy rock. And yet it's not dated because it's played with such conviction. And of course, it's an all star lineup. Ronnie Wood playing bass, of all things, and of course, Rod Stewart on vocals. But the album that for me was really the coming out party of Jeff Beck, where it really all clicked, was Rough and Ready by what was at that point called the Jeff Beck Group. A group of virtuosos, let's be honest, with Max Middleton, wonderful jazz and fusion keyboard player on that album, playing mostly piano, some electric stuff. Cozy Powell on drums, who I recently did a video about, the great vocalist Bobby Trench, and Clive Sharman on bass. Really great lineup, wonderful songwriting. I think this is the album where Jeff's songwriting really came into its own, and there's just not a bad song on the album. The follow-up Jeff Beck group from 72 was really good, same lineup, but something was missing. From that first album. He then moved on to do a sort of Vanilla Fudge collaboration. He worked with Carmine Appice, the great Vanilla Fudge drummer, and Tom Bogart, bassist and one of the vocalists for the group, and they did a sensational hard rocking, blues rocking album, Beck, Bogart, and Appice. Absolutely wonderful stuff. And then came what I call the sort of mature period of Jeff Beck's career, and this began with Blow by Blow from 1975. He kept Max Middleton from the original Jeff Beck group with him. George Martin, the fifth Beatle, produces it and does a lot of beautiful string arrangements. It really is an album that introduced the world to someone who was no longer sort of 1.5 feet in the rock world and the other in the sort of jazz world. This was someone who was making jazz fusion albums in the same vein and with the same virtuosity as your Weather Reports, your Mahavishnu Orchestras, your Return to Forevers, your Headhunters. I mean, Jeff Beck was not only accepted by, but he was embraced by the club of fusion musicians. Now, my favorite Jeff Beck album of all time came from 1976, and this was Wired, sometimes mispronounced as Weird. And this had a really, really all-star cast of musicians. Max Middleton was back. They had a great collaborative relationship, but he also brought in Jan Hammer, wonderful, wonderful synth and piano player, one of my favorites of all time. You may remember him from the original lineup of Mahavishnu Orchestra, from the second lineup of Mahavishnu Orchestra, and a wonderful solo artist in his own right, the great drummer and producer and songwriter and singer Narada Michael Walden. Absolutely wonderful. Some drumming from Richard Bailey, who was also on Blow by Blow. And when you put that all together, it was just a wonderful, wonderful album. I think his very finest. But he played more and more with Jan Hammer. They released a live album in '77. He welcomed the '80s with an album called There and Back, which also featured Jan Hammer. You had Simon Phillips on the drums, the great English sort of fusion and session guy, Mo Foster on bass. And from there on out, he just did such interesting stuff. I mean, the if you really want to hear the 1980s Jeff Beck, sound it's at the tail end of the '80s, check out Jeff Beck's Guitar Shop with a very tongue-in-cheek Terry Bozzio providing not only drums but the occasional lyrics. And really all of the collaborations that he went on to do were so interesting, including his final ever collaboration working with actor-musician Johnny Depp. And they had what, by the looks, it was such a pure and genuine friendship. The celebrity didn't matter. They were two guys really enjoying being on the road. Jeff Beck is very missed, but the music will always be so loved. As always, like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.